In the summer of 2014, Aberdeen had more millionaires per head of population than any city in Britain outside London. A cash machine on Union Street reportedly processed higher withdrawals than any single machine in Europe. That was June. 18 months later, the oil that had built every part of that wealth was trading at $27 a barrel. White-collar workers in the city were arriving at food banks, and the richest city in the country was discovering what happens when an entire economy rests on a commodity whose price someone else decides. 44 years before that cash machine became a symbol of excess, Aberdeen was a city in the middle of a long decline. Its fishing fleet was shrinking. Its granite quarries, which had once supplied the stone for much of London's street infrastructure, were closing one by one. By the late 1960s, Aberdeen was a regional port on the northeast shoulder of Scotland, and the economy offered fewer reasons to arrive with every passing year. Then, on the 7th of October 1970, BP made an announcement. A drilling rig called Sequest, operating 110 miles east of Aberdeen, had struck oil. The field was enormous. BP named it the Forties Field, and within 5 years, it would supply roughly a fifth of the United Kingdom's total oil needs. The rig had been sent there, in part, because it happened to be free. Aberdeen oil executive Sir Ian Wood would later recall that BP's senior figures watched the first production platform being towed out to the site with, in his words, their fingers crossed. The geology did not care about their doubts. By 1979, the Forties Field was producing 500,000 barrels a day. Above every early forecast, Aberdeen, the declining fishing port, was now the operational headquarters of one of the largest hydrocarbon discoveries in Western Europe. The transformation was fast, and it was total. Within a decade, thousands of American engineers and geologists arrived, the so-called wildcatters of the international oil industry, bringing with them salaries and expectations the city had never seen. The sound of helicopters became the rhythm of the city, the constant chop of rotors above dice as crews transferred to and from the platforms. The granite streets, grey under a sky that was grey more often than not, filled with accents that had never been heard there before. Aberdeen became, by contemporary accounts, one of the most cosmopolitan cities in Britain, requiring new schools, new housing, and new medical infrastructure built at a speed no one had planned for. But the wealth was never as evenly distributed as the statistics suggested. A teacher working in one of Aberdeen's poorer districts during the boom would later recall being troubled by the gap between the city's reputation as the oil capital of Europe and the reality of children living in genuine poverty in its schools. The per capita wealth figures told one story. The classrooms, in certain postcodes, told another. The broader trajectory, though, was unmistakable. By 2010, Aberdeen ranked 6th of the United Kingdom's 63 primary urban areas for disposable income. The cash machine on Union Street was said to record the highest individual withdrawals of any machine in Europe, oil workers returning from 2-week rotations on the platforms, queuing to withdraw sums that would have been remarkable in the City of London. All of it built on oil, and all of it, therefore, dependent on the price of oil staying where it was. The cost of that dependence, the human cost, had already been measured on the 6th of July, 1988. A maintenance crew on the Piper Alpha production platform removed a safety valve for routine servicing. The open pipe was sealed with a metal plug. A night shift, unaware the valve had been removed, restarted the pump. Gas escaped, ignited, and within minutes the platform was engulfed. 167 men died, most of them in less than 2 hours. 30 bodies were never recovered. Piper Alpha remains the deadliest offshore oil disaster in history. Aberdeen was the oil capital. Aberdeen buried the oil workers. Those two facts lived alongside each other, and neither cancelled the other out. A memorial garden in Hazelhead Park, on the western edge of the city, bears the names of all 167 men. It is maintained by the same city whose economy depends on sending more men to the same water. Despite that, the North Sea oil industry did not slow down. If anything, it accelerated. By 2011, Brent crude had settled above $100 a barrel and stayed there, month after month, year after year, the longest sustained period above that level in the benchmark's history. And within Aberdeen, within the supply chain companies and the mortgage lenders and the individual households that planned their futures around the price of oil, a quiet assumption took root. The price was not going to fall. Not meaningfully, not permanently. That assumption seemed reasonable at the time. It was not. Across the Atlantic, American shale oil producers had been quietly adding millions of barrels a day to global supply. Aberdeen had not noticed. And in Scotland, the 2014 independence referendum placed North Sea oil revenue at the centre of the case for a self-financing state. The Scottish government's white paper on independence assumed oil prices well above $100 a barrel for the foreseeable future. On those figures, an independent Scotland's share of North Sea tax revenue would have underpinned the entire fiscal architecture of the new state. The country voted no by 55% to 45%. Had it voted yes, the new nation would have come into existence in March 2016, the precise month Brent crude was trading at $38. The fiscal foundations of the prospectus would have been in ruins before the first day of statehood. A professor of petroleum economics at the University of Aberdeen named Alex Kemp had been warning that the North Sea was, in his words, high cost by international standards. Nobody wanted to hear it. In November 2014, OPEC, led by Saudi Arabia, made the decision that broke the price. Rather than cutting production to defend the $100 floor, Saudi Arabia chose to let the market fall, deliberately squeezing higher-cost producers out. Saudi Arabia could afford to wait. It had reserves, low extraction costs, and a tolerance for short-term pain that no Western producer could match. The North Sea, with its deep water platforms and its weather-dependent helicopter logistics, was precisely the kind of basin that could not compete at the new price. Extracting oil from beneath cold, storm-battered water 100 miles offshore was structurally more expensive than pumping it from a desert well in the Middle East. At $100 a barrel, the cost was manageable. At $60, many fields were barely breaking even. At $27, they were hemorrhaging money. In June 2014, Brent crude had traded at approximately $115 a barrel. By January 2016, it touched $27. 75% of the value of a barrel of North Sea oil had disappeared in 18 months. The consequences arrived in the form of redundancy letters, cancelled contracts, and empty desks in offices that had, 12 months earlier, been unable to hire fast enough. By mid-2016, an estimated 100,000 jobs had been lost across the supply chain. The UK Treasury's take from the North Sea, £9.6 billion, in 2011, fell to £60 million within a few years, a collapse of more than 99%. Aberdeen's own oil and gas sector, measured by gross value added, peaked at £6.25 billion in 2015. By 2021, it had fallen 45%. Jake Malloy, an organiser for the RMT union, who had worked on the platforms himself, described morale across the offshore workforce as very low. Strikes broke out on North Sea oil installations for the first time in more than 20 years. But the detail that cut deepest was the simplest one. On paper, Aberdeen was still one of the richest cities in Britain. White-collar former oil executives were, in the same year, arriving at food banks. The wealth and the poverty occupied the same postcode. Neither invalidated the other. The pattern is one that recurs in the economic history of Britain's single-industry cities. From the cotton mills of Lancashire, to the shipyards of the Clyde, to the fishing ports of the East Coast. Dependency, followed by shock, followed by something worse. The discovery that the shock is not the end of the story, but only its beginning. By 2016, the aftermath had begun to compound. A business rates revaluation, calculated using the booming 2015 economy, hit Aberdeen's hospitality firms, engineering companies, and high street retailers with increases of more than 100%. The rates were based on the boom. They landed in the middle of the bust. A tax system designed to capture the wealth of a boom arrived to extract revenue from a bust. The rates were calculated before the crash, announced during it, and collected throughout it. People began to leave. Between 2010 and 2020, 14,472 people departed, 7% of the city's population. The young left fastest. The 20 to 29 age group fell 16%. Average house prices dropped roughly 15%, while every comparable UK region rose. Aberdeen became the only area in the country where house prices fell over the decade. Union Street, the granite thoroughfare that had once been the commercial spine of the city, accumulated empty units at a rate that made visible, in glass and stone, what the statistics were saying in numbers. But before any of it could stabilise, a second collapse arrived. In April 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic sent Brent crude below $20 a barrel, its lowest level in 20 years. Aberdeen recorded the steepest population fall of any Scottish city during the pandemic, losing 1,630 residents in a single year. The city was not merely declining, it was accelerating in the wrong direction. In July 2015, figures had shown that Aberdeen had overtaken Edinburgh as the UK city with the highest disposable income per head, the first time since records began in 1997. The data behind that ranking predated the worst of the crash. Aberdeen was being crowned the richest city in the country at the precise moment the wealth that justified the title was evaporating. By 2023, it was one of only 2 UK cities with fewer jobs than it had had in 2010. Approximately 18,000 positions had disappeared, roughly 10% of the city's total workforce. This was not a temporary contraction. It was a structural, decade-long decline. The city is not standing still. ETZ Limited, the energy transition zone established in 2021 next to Aberdeen South Harbour, aims to create 2,500 direct jobs in offshore wind, hydrogen, and carbon capture. In October 2025, the UK government confirmed £17.3 million of further funding. As of mid-2025, roughly 200 oil and gas workers were receiving funded retraining into renewable energy roles. The offshore wind sector requires many of the same skills as oil and gas extraction, the same understanding of subsea infrastructure, the same experience of hostile marine conditions. The transferable skills exist. Whether they can be transferred at the speed the transition demands is the question nobody in the city can yet answer. 200, out of a workforce that once numbered in the tens of thousands. Aberdeen, in 2026, is a city that has not yet decided what it is. An oil city attempting a green transition, or a green energy city, still dependent on the fossil fuel industry it has not yet replaced. The two identities sit beside each other, unreconciled, in the same way the millionaires and the food bank queues sat beside each other a decade ago. The cash machine on Union Street still works. The queue outside it is a great deal shorter than it used to be. In July 2015, Aberdeen was named the wealthiest city in Britain. The data was already old. The oil was already falling. The workers were already beginning to leave. Aberdeen's story is not a story of failure. It is a story of dependency. One resource, one price, one decision made in a boardroom in Vienna, and a city of 200,000 people discovers that 40 years of wealth can be undone by 18 months of market arithmetic. For those following how Britain's cities have been built, unmade, and rebuilt, There are more of these stories still to come.